Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this webinar on Publisher Revenue Strategy in the Privacy Era. I'm David Teich, Senior Editor of Client Content at DIGIDAY Media. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a few details on the structure of today's session. So over the course of the webinar, we'll be discussing some of the biggest findings from a survey of more than 100 publishers. In partnership with CafeMedia, we explored the differences between how large businesses are approaching the new privacy landscape and how their independent competitors are trying to keep pace. More on that later. Following this discussion, we'll have some time for Q&A, so take advantage of that. You don't have to wait until the end to submit your questions. You can add them at any point during the session through the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar platform. If you have a specific panelist in mind whom you'd like to answer the question, feel free to specify. We'll get to as many questions as possible after the discussion. Everyone registered will also get a recording of this webinar in their inbox tomorrow, should you miss anything or want to revisit any part of the conversation. Okay, so let's do some introductions. The voices you're about to hear belong to Michael Horn, Chief Data Officer at Huge, Neil Nelson, CEO of Atlanta Blackstar, and Tina Pouts, SVP of CafeMedia Ad Management. Great to have all of you. Michael, it would be great to give the listeners a bit of background into Huge and what your role is there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to join. Huge is a global experience agency. We build apps, websites, retail experiences, really for publishers and for brands alike. Been around for about 20 years and 1,300 people. I'm the chief data officer, lead a team of about 50 researchers and data scientists who really help to identify what the optimal solution is for any experience that we're building. But I started actually my career on the publisher side. I was at NPR for about 6 years. I helped to launch the first edition of podcasts. But then went on 15 years progressively of time spent helping both brands, marketers, and also 3 years at a MarTech firm. So I've seen all sides of the industry.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Neil, same to you. Tell us about Atlanta Blackstar and what you do there.
Thank you. Again, Neil Nelson, I'm the founder of Atlanta Blackstar. I've been in the digital media space now for over 12 years, specifically with Atlanta Blackstar. It's been 8 years this month, actually. And we are the largest African-American owned digital news platform in the country. And we have been focused primarily on not just telling the stories that we think are important, but also helping people to understand how best to be a part of the news and drive attention to their brands, wares, and other interests. Before this, I was previously at the Home Depot as an engineer in global logistics, and at the same time, an entrepreneur. So I've been a serial entrepreneur really all of my professional life.
Great, thank you, Neil. Finally, Tina, can you tell us a bit about CafeMedia and your role there?
Happy to. I'm Tina Pouts, and I have been in the digital media, advertising, and MarTech space for about 10 years now. I started my career at a retargeting company called BuySite that was bought by AOL. More recently, I was leading a multi-touch attribution and media mix platform called Convertro over at Verizon Media, and I have been leading CafeMedia ad management team that works with our largest publishers for almost a year now. Some of you might actually be familiar with CafeMedia. We've been around for about 20 years and started as a publisher ourselves. We had a series of owned and operated sites, primarily in the food, family, and home categories. Since then, we've actually sold off our O&Os, and we focus today on programmatic ad management. We're the world's largest ad management firm and the exclusive advertising representative for over 2,400 of the highest quality digital publishers. We fully manage their programmatic ad stacks to drive lift, streamline operations, and allow them to focus on content creation and audience development. Before we get started, I do want to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy during a pretty strange and uncertain time. Today, we're going to talk about the current state of the digital advertising industry, specifically the impacts of browsers deprecating the third-party cookie, as well as ever-changing privacy laws and regulations. We'll touch on 5 separate but often interrelated potential paths forward for publishers in a privacy-first world. First, we'll look at ways publishers will leverage new technologies to compensate for reduced user tracking and anticipated loss of revenue. We'll then touch base on the return of contextual targeting and ways publishers can better scale it. On a related note, we'll get into first-party data sharing and then identity solutions. And finally, we'll review opportunities for non-advertising revenue streams. Before we wrap up, we'll review some highlights and key takeaways, and we'll be sure to save some time for questions at the end. It goes without saying that our world has changed pretty dramatically over the last few months. As we're all experiencing, the coronavirus has impacted nearly every aspect of our lives, and digital advertising is no exception. Kind of seems like simpler times that just a few months ago, advertisers and publishers were largely focused on two looming changes that would greatly impact digital advertising. The first is browsers phasing out third-party cookies, and specifically Google setting the clock to deprecate them in Chrome within the next 2 years. The second is sweeping data privacy regulations like GDPR and CCPA, and the potential for numerous state-level policies to follow suit. Both of these changes represent major disruption to the larger advertising industry and the way brands, agencies, and publishers collect user data to drive ad targeting, and they're all still moving forward. Despite recently rolling back same-site cookie changes, Google has made it clear that Chrome still plans to phase out cookies over the next 2 years. And just a week and a half ago, Apple updated Safari ITP to fully block all third-party cookies. In addition, there are currently hundreds of privacy, cybersecurity, and data bills pending across all 50 states. If anything, the current economic state and its impact on digital advertising may make the impact of the death of third-party cookies and sweeping privacy regulations even greater than before. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. This chart shows the differential of Chrome versus Safari smartphone CPMs across CafeMedia's network of about 2,400 plus digital publishers from early February to the end of March. Safari CPMs are generally about 40% lower than Chrome already, so we set that ratio to 1, and we track the change over time. For the first few weeks, Chrome and Safari CPMs tracked more or less together, and then around March 16th, the spread became more dramatic. In the following 2 weeks, which were most severely impacted by coronavirus, Safari CPMs dropped by 10% more than Chrome CPMs did. The negative impact on CPMs due to the coronavirus pandemic amplified what's already a challenge in Safari due to third-party cookie blocking via Apple ITP, and it hints at what we may see when third-party cookies are eliminated in Chrome. To better understand the tracking and privacy changes underway, from January to February of this year, CafeMedia partnered with DIGIDAY to survey hundreds of publishers across sizes and verticals in order to understand how they're shifting strategies and tactics in light of the evolving privacy landscape. Next slide, please. We found that publishers across the board are bracing for change. A majority predict that browser cookie restrictions and privacy regulations will result in decreased ability to collect user data and a resulting material impact on revenue. Specifically, 51% of publishers expect browser restrictions of third-party cookies to decrease their ability to collect user data, and 46% anticipate lost revenue. An even greater percent, 73%, anticipate data privacy regulations will negatively impact their collection of user data, while 61% expect a loss in revenue. As news of new privacy proposals and browser updates has continued to break, many in our industry have predicted that publishers will completely alter their entire revenue stream and pivot away from advertising to subscriptions or other offerings. That actually wasn't at all what our survey showed. Instead, our respondents said they plan to rely on new technology and strategic partnerships to help them maintain their ad-based business models. The other key finding our survey revealed is that strategies and tactics going forward will differ along the lines of organization size and resources. It was a recurring theme in the survey results and something we'll continue to highlight through the rest of this webinar. Michael, you added some really great perspective to the white paper we created on this topic. Would love to hear your thoughts on how publishers can be thinking about revenue opportunities in light of these industry changes.
Thank you, Tina. Yeah, no, these are all is really great research, and I think it's really, especially in such dynamic times, just keeping track of the regulatory changes is certainly hard enough. At the same time, user expectations are changing a lot, and something that I spend a lot of time thinking about is how do you make sure that the value exchange that you're communicating to audiences is resonating correctly with those audiences. And that's certainly the transparency and value that you provide to that audience is the clearest driver of people's willingness to register and provide you with that critical first-party data. And the other point just to raise in all this is, of course, many of the challenges that you're talking about in this data are felt on the marketer side too. The loss of tracking and multiple touch attribution and first-party data is also all the same regulatory and user expectations are also impacting their ability to tell a clear story about ROI. So definitely there are opportunities, but the opportunities are really at the intersection of respect for users and an understanding of the challenges that are also being faced by brands themselves.
Very interesting. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Michael. In this new world, publishers will really need to do two things. One is to be compliant with new policies and privacy laws, which is basically table stakes to continue operation. And the second is to adapt their business models and revenue mix to accommodate the changes and continue to thrive. Given that all publishers must meet the standards of new privacy laws, the percentage of large and small publishers using technology to accommodate privacy regulations is relatively similar, 73% and 64% respectively, which is what we see in the chart on the left. But when we look at how publishers plan to leverage technology to compensate for cookie restrictions, we can see that larger publishers have an advantage. 64% plan to work with new technology partners versus only 44% of smaller pubs. Larger pubs, for example, the Comscore 100, have deeper pockets and resources to invest in new ad technologies and tactics, even while testing out new revenue models. Smaller publishers, by comparison, may be more limited in their ability to implement and test out new technology. It's not just financial resources that can be a restriction, but it's also a matter of bandwidth. Publishers, especially independent ones, succeed by creating high-quality content and developing engaged audiences. Beyond being an additional cost, onboarding and managing new tech can be a distraction from that. Atlanta Black Star is a perfect example of a premium independent publisher with great original content and high-value audience. Neil, would love to hear how you've been able to succeed throughout so many industry changes.
Thank you, Tina. I think the important thing for us, we always recognize that as an independent publisher, we don't have as much resource to navigate the complex environment that we operate in. The ecosystem of both as being a publisher and monetizing our platform requires. And so we've, from the very beginning, have trusted third-party companies like CafeMedia to help us navigate the terrain. When you think about our company and our growth, our partnership with CafeMedia, for example, caused us to double revenue year over year and to adapt to the changes that are happening in real time. Without that partnership, we couldn't do that kind of change and growth and respond to what's happening in the marketplace, because with our resources, we have to focus on where our strength lies, which is content creation and content distribution. And this is true for not just with CafeMedia as our partner, but other partners that we have that helps us figure out and stay abreast of all the changes that are happening. If your company is really smaller than 500 employees and you don't have expertise in data management and the ad ecosystem and distribution and the options that are coming down the pipeline, the changes that are coming from Facebook and Google that are constant, it's going to be overwhelming. And so having third parties is something that we knew we had to integrate fully as a business strategy, is finding the best third-party companies that are in the system, that are trusted, that are reliable, and that have the right orientation of service and value add to our business.
Thanks, Neil. And I really think that applies not just in digital advertising, but as a whole. If you're able to focus on your core competencies and your differentiators and find partners who can take on the load of some other things that might not be your core strength, it's certainly a more scalable and efficient path forward. Getting back to our survey results, I do want to touch on contextual targeting. And certainly something that we're seeing make a bit of a comeback as third-party cookies are sunset and user tracking is restricted. 58% of the publishers we surveyed plan to expand their contextual offering. Contextual has actually been a key part of our strategy at CafeMedia for some time now. From our perspective, there are 3 elements for how a publisher can grow their business via contextual targeting. The first is partnering with existing contextual targeting solutions like Oracle's Grapeshot and IBM Watson. At CafeMedia, we work with these firms to get an understanding of how our advertisers see the inventory of our publishers, to set up basic brand safety targeting, and also to do table stakes contextual across wide swaths of content. The second way that publishers can leverage contextual targeting is to build their own systems specializing in their particular content. At CafeMedia, we built our contextual targeting system, which we call Marmalade, almost 3 years ago. Marmalade allows us to target the content of our publishers much more specifically, which has great value for advertisers. Recently, we've seen several large publishers take a similar approach. For example, Business Insider launched their Saga platform, and Vox is their Forte solution. The third approach publishers can take to expanding their contextual capabilities is to work with DMPs and CDPs to make that data persistent for users and available to advertisers. At CafeMedia, we're also now working with the IAB and prebid.org to make it so that publisher first-party data can be used with open market programmatic buying, not just in PAPs and direct deals. In any case, publishers will need to invest in greater technical infrastructure to make contextual truly scalable and first-party data more accessible to advertisers and agencies. On one hand, these moves will help publishers gain a better understanding of the data, facilitate targeting, and help them to partner more effectively with advertisers. On the other hand, the increased reliance on technology introduces a significant new cost, one that's easier for larger publishers to bear. First-party data is really one of the largest potential gold mines for publishers that can fill the cookie void. In addition to contextual, there's also registration data and on-site behavioral data. First-party data in particular also presents an opportunity for publishers and advertisers to work more closely together. Our survey showed that 56% of publishers plan to tighten their relationships with brands and advertisers. Michael, what are your thoughts on what's needed in order to make first-party data truly accessible and scalable?
Thank you, Tina. I think you called out a couple really important things there. And part of this is just the intersection of these different technologies. That first-party data isn't just about getting a user to register. It's about being able to attribute real meaning to that user's behaviors. And that's where things like NLP, which previously might have just been used to look at the content on its own, you can use that same technology to enrich your understanding of the user and the audience member and what it is that they're looking for. So if you're able to roll up their behaviors, what kinds of content they're looking for across a primary publishing channel, but also for companion channels like CRM, or even emerging channels which are not that attributable like podcasting, but you want to create that kind of holistic view, and understanding the commonalities of the content they consume in each of those offerings is a really important way to build that profile of the customer or the audience member. It's also really important to note that as we talk about the resource investment that's required for some of these platforms, it's very substantial. And so partnering to pool resources across these technologies, sharing best practices, but also sharing these instances is a really important part of being able to compete with larger players. And then just a final thought here is just the complexity involved in deploying many of these tools requires quite a bit of professional services support. And this has been a real challenge, even for many leading technology platforms, to help smaller organizations provide the level of support and guidance to help them get these technologies deployed. This has been a pain point where there are big promises on the speed of integrations, and then it turns out to be much more complex, especially if a smaller organization doesn't quite know what its primary use case is and what value that they'll get from those technologies. So I would just encourage everyone to take both that cross-channel view, but also take a very realistic view of how complex it is to deploy cross-channel perspectives.
Thanks, Michael. And couldn't agree more. I think that there's so much potential in first-party data, but there's still such a significant investment that's required to really unlock the potential of all of that. What's interesting is that our data showed that 44% of the publishers we surveyed do plan to use first-party data for targeting outside of their site. A separate but kind of related concept is using non-cookie-based IDs to anonymously track users in a privacy-friendly and opt-in way. Our survey indicated that enterprise publishers like News Corp are the organizations most likely to lean into ID databases, with 64% of publishers with over 1,000 employees intending to do so, compared to half that number, 32%, of small to mid-sized publishers. In many cases, smaller publishers may lack the required resources and technological capabilities to develop databases of individual IDs or the bandwidth to manage them. These universal ID systems rely on other identifiers, like an email or a phone number, beyond third-party cookies to track users. A critical component of these systems is user opt-in and transparency, so users understand the value exchange. Essentially, it's saying, I value this site and I want to give them, or I want to help them earn money, so I'm okay giving them a piece of my information about myself in exchange for their content. There are a number of key industry players, LibraryAmp, LiveIntent, and a few others that are developing first-party cookie-based systems that rely on this concept of users sharing email addresses to track them, and also being clear about the trade-off to users. Next slide. Another point our respondents shared is that the future will be a diversified environment, with revenue streams relying on data to augment ad sales and contextual targeting, in addition to non-advertising revenue like subscriptions. Our survey suggested that the most widely used tactic in response to cookie restriction will involve working with new technology providers. 50% of responders plan to do so. Additionally, 47% of the publishers surveyed indicated they plan to provide new goods and services that can engage users willing to share information, while only 33% will turn to non-advertising revenue streams like subscriptions to replace lost revenue, specifically due to third-party cookie data. Neil, I know you've had a lot of success in creating well-diversified revenue streams. Can you tell us a little bit more about your approach?
Yeah, sure, Tina. I think that, from the very beginning, we've always felt that the current ecosystem in the model, as a publisher that targets African American community, we've always felt that we didn't get our full share of the ad dollars, and therefore we felt insecure about depending primarily on this revenue stream. In fact, this is not just my point of view, but this has been the case for minority-owned publishers in this country going back, 60 years. In fact, Earl Graves, who just passed away last week, has been one of the icon in our sector, at least in our part of the ecosystem. And from the very beginning, he had to go out and use his publishing business to secure other revenue streams through acquiring, for example, a bottling company at Pepsi, a private equity firm, partnership, and so forth, because he understood that the revenue that came down the pipeline wouldn't be sufficient to grow his business. We've done the same thing. We've taken really that same play out of his book and gone and done similar things and built relationships with other companies to help us figure out how to gain revenue completely separate from the advertising space, but also to leverage our audience to build value for the company in ways that are non-traditional. And we could talk more about those as maybe in the Q&A section of the conversation.
Great, thank you, Neil.
Yeah.
Getting back to our survey data, when we broke down publishers' plans to diversify revenue beyond advertising, we again found a significant divergence based on size. At 55%, more than twice as many publishers with over 1,000 employees plan to look to non-advertising revenue in response to cookie restrictions. The variance is a bit smaller when asked about growing subscription offerings in response to privacy regulations, with 45% of larger publishers planning to do so, compared to 36% of small to mid-sized ones. Next slide. The overarching theme our survey revealed is that the path forward for publishers will vary based on their size. As cookies vanish and new laws come into play, the Condes and Merediths of the world may appear to have an advantage given their size and scale. The truth is that all publishers, regardless of size, can be successful if they keep an open mind and innovative outlook. As we wrap up, there are a few key takeaways that we'd like to leave you with. The first is that all publishers will need to adjust their business models to continue to thrive in a world where third-party cookies cease to exist and user data privacy concerns continue to drive new regulations. The status quo is just not going to be a sustainable path forward. Publishers should assess the strength and sustainability of their current ad model and determine the extent to which they'll need to supplement it with new efforts tied to data and technology. As our survey has shown, advertising will continue to be the lifeblood for publishers, but the modes of targeting and architecture required to support it will need to adapt. Small and mid-sized publishers in particular need to assess internal expertise and capabilities critically. Bringing on new technology may be a benefit, but can also be a strain on limited resources, both human and financial. Working with the right strategic partner can streamline costs and simplify the complexity of navigating the new privacy-first world. It also allows publishers to focus on developing new revenue streams and their key differentiators like content creation and audience development. The end of third-party cookies and changes to user privacy regulation will require an evolution of digital advertising for sure, but our industry is accustomed to change. If anything, it can spark innovation, and we're optimistic that the future will be one where quality publishers of all sizes will be able to succeed in a new privacy-first world. Thank you, and I think we can take questions now.
Thank you so much, Tina. Really great discussion all around. So there have been a few key stats and advice covered, and as a reminder, everyone listening will get a recording of this tomorrow if you need to listen back. But we've got some time for questions now, and some of them are already starting to come in, but as a reminder, you can submit any questions you have via the questions tab on the platform. And if you have anyone in mind, any of the panelists specifically who'd like to answer, feel free to specify. So let's get to some of these. So first of all, I'll just start with a question that I had on my end. You know, it's so interesting. You have these things happening at once. These cookie restrictions and regulations. All of these things are hitting publishers and marketers all at the same time. I would start by asking Tina, is one of these trends more concerning than the other for publishers that you've worked with, or do you think that it's just kind of all of a piece at this point?
It's a fair question. Look, publishers are concerned about both. They're anticipating both a loss in user data collection as well as material hit to revenue, which is what our survey indicated. What's interesting now, and certainly came as a little bit of a surprise to me, was that publishers we surveyed actually responded with slightly greater concern on both points about the privacy regulations than about cookie death. I kind of think that there are probably a couple of reasons for that. One is that with Google's announcement setting the clock 2 years out, the advertising community as a whole has had more time to come up with solutions. And Safari and Firefox already having done away with third-party cookies for some time now, it really felt like it was more of a matter of when and not if that change was going to come for Chrome. So I think both publishers and advertisers alike have had more time to prepare. Another point is that in addition to what we've discussed today, there are new technologies like Google's Privacy Sandbox, which leverages the browser to accomplish some of the similar targeting capabilities of third-party cookies in a more privacy-friendly way. There's also IAB's Project ReArc. In both cases, we've got a number of very smart people and organizations who are all working together to come up with a path forward that hopefully creates a win for advertisers, publishers, and users all around. You know, I think the other thing is that the threat of a multitude of state-level regulations that all might be nuanced can become very quickly something that is unmanageable and impossible for a number of publishers to support. There's infrastructure, there's costs. What we saw with CCPA is that there was such a huge mobilization effort by our industry, not just to support it, but really even just to understand what all the legislation meant. And, you know, the other point is that with CCPA, we saw a relatively small impact across our network as a whole, just a few percentage points in CPM for California users. But if you think about that multiplied a number of different states, it quickly can become very material for publishers' overall revenue. And then I think, you know, just to speak a little bit to the survey results, again, broken out by publisher size, the overarching theme that we saw is that larger publishers have greater resources and scale to potentially test out and build new solutions in-house, while the small and mid-sized publishers' opportunity is really to focus on their key differentiators and strengths, and then look to opportunities to partner in order to streamline operations and share the burden of some of the necessary requirements to support upcoming changes.
Interesting. I guess I would really throw the same question to the publisher that we have here. Neil, especially speaking from the perspective of an independent publisher, which of these trends are more concerning to you?
Apologies. I think the cookie issue is the most important part of this whole piece for us, primarily because we rely a lot on programmatic advertising dollars, and that's going to get impacted significantly by the changes, especially with where our traffic sources coming from the Google world. And so that's the biggest piece that we're looking at. And the bad and the good thing is that the good thing is that we have a lot of time to really think about it and find a solution. I think 2 years is a lot of time. The bad thing is that because of our size, we're likely to not be able to design our own solutions and implement them in time. And this is why earlier I mentioned about the idea of finding partners, and we're constantly looking at that, at finding people like LiveRamp and others to kind of cobble together our own solution from what's already out there in the ecosystem. Because what's happening too is that a lot of ad tech companies are taking advantage of this opportunity to provide innovative solutions. And so independent publishers don't have to go it alone. We can actually ride the wave if we get out front and not try to avoid the problem, but think seriously about it and make it a priority to adapt to the changes that are coming in the pipeline.
Interesting. Well, I guess following on that, I can move to one of the questions that we got from our audience. So I guess this is the big, broad one. What are some of the examples of additional revenue streams that publishers should explore? I would start with you, Neil, and afterwards, Michael, I have a follow-up for you.
Sure. I think it varies, and it depends on what your audience profile is for your publication. So we target the African American community and broadly, and so there are different pieces of that we can cut up and engage with different companies and in different industries. And so I'll give a couple of examples. One thing that we've done is we've gone out and looked at several industries that are really innovative and growing really fast. We look at the edtech space, education technology space, the health tech space, and the fintech space. And those are three areas that our audience are always looking for additional solutions, additional alternative ways, whether it is to generate revenue for themselves or to continue their education or to better manage health issues. And so what we have done is gone out to different startups and say, well, we can help you grow your audience or your user base through our platform in exchange for, well, maybe a few dollars to offset our cost, but primarily maybe some equity in your venture. We've also done other things of saying, well, we'll help you guys leverage our media services. So we create media all the time. We'll take responsibility of helping tell your stories, kind of a native advertising play, but geared towards a part of the economy that doesn't have the big solutions that are available via, let's say, the New York Times of the world that also provide these solutions. Other things that we've done is look at how can we best use our revenue. And so sometimes we've gone out and looked at how can we invest our money month to month or week to week with investors that can help us grow our revenue through the stock market. So there's a plethora of other solutions like this that are on our table that we're looking at. We're also looking at rolling out specific branded products with companies that advertise specifically towards our audience that may not want to come back for a second year to invest in advertising with us, but they're willing to partner with us in creating solutions that our audience can buy directly or other products.
It's really interesting. Yeah, Michael, I guess one question I would have for you is, so Neil here is speaking from this perspective of an independent publisher. The approach that you'd take if you were BuzzFeed might be different. Um, so how, when you're talking about additional revenue streams, one of the things that our survey research surfaced was that, publishers like BuzzFeed, they're more inclined, of course, to try things like subscriptions and other additional revenue streams. Um, I guess my question is, if you're an independent publisher, what is your approach to this? Are you less inclined to do that? Should you be more inclined to do that? Is it a question of resources? How are people going about this?
Yeah, so well, first I would say the key thing is just for that independent publisher to have a really clear definition of the audience that it reaches and the value it provides that audience. It all starts with being indispensable, and by and large, brands are looking for publishers that have that connection to that audience to partner with, and have a lot of desire to find innovative ways to tell stories that could be, delivering utility through things like, calculators, or kind of more like personal stories that deliver inspiration or kind of solutions to people who would find that relevant. It can be more portable media like podcasts that can be have more of an evergreen presentation, or can be like syndicated across different platforms. But by and large, the commonality here is that for smaller publishers, these aren't necessarily the most production intensive types of products. And in fact, in some cases, the brands will bring their own production resources to the table. What they really have to nurture, though, is that that lean-in relationship and an indispensable connection with their audiences. Yeah, but that can scale down to a smaller audience as long as it can demonstrate that value.
Interesting. Thank you. Tina, I have a question for you. This is from our audience. So for users where publishers don't have data like login data, email, or phone number, how will the deterministic only ID providers you mentioned, like LiveRamp, like LiveIntent, support them?
Yeah, so we actually didn't get into this specific question in our survey, but I can speak a little bit more broadly to the subject, kind of based on what we see at CafeMedia across our publishers. And the truth is that some publishers actually do have a good amount of emails, either because they've focused on email list development or because they have a really strong, compelling reason for users to register. Other publishers, of course, will need to focus on building these out in the future. But there is an opportunity for publishers, and I would say particularly premium ones, to experiment in the future with free walls. So users will have to share their email to use the website, and users can understand the value exchange a little bit more than they do today. All of that really will put the focus on premium content. Basically, the better your content is, the more likely you'll get emails from users, and therefore you can continue to support your business through advertising.
Interesting. Michael, just as as a data expert, I'd be curious if you have any additional insights on that same question.
It's a little outside of my recent area of focus, but this is these are all really really important questions. I think that the key thing here is that you by defining use cases clearly and getting the right people in front of them, you can often find these secondary and tertiary uses for these tools.
Got it. Thank you. All right, so we have another question from our audience. Which industry groups are going to be the ones who shape the new mechanism which will substitute cookies? I know it's an interesting question. Tina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there's Project Rearc, and there's W3, and as I mentioned already, Google's Privacy Sandbox. We're not really sure how all of this is going to play out just yet. Again, speaking from my experience with CafeMedia, we're actually working with Project Rearc, W3, and Google in order to figure out what the best solution will be going forward. We do think that it's critical that whatever the new solutions are, that they'll need to be privacy first and truly give users comfort. We also think that users will need clear opt-in and opt-out capabilities to whatever sorts of identity solutions are used. That said, we're not really sure that there's going to be any sort of quote-unquote universal ID. There might not be any sort of a universal ID system that that supports all of the privacy features that I think will be required going forward.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so we have another question here. How will contextual and/or first-party data through DMP or CDP help advertisers outside of just targeting? Is there support there for frequency capping or cross-site or measurement and attribution? Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is one of the areas where I think I hear the most concern from the brand side, because that ability to control your spend and optimize your investments, and what you really don't want is to cede that that kind of single point of visibility to one of the big platform companies, so that the pressure being placed on third-party MTA solutions is a real risk factor here on the frequency capping or just the measurement attribution. I would add any other types of audience validation tool sets. But I would say that there's a lot of value from contextual and first-party tools beyond just targeting. There's a lot of just overall insights on audience relevance and kind of ad effectiveness, channel effectiveness that can be rolled up. So even if you're not able to use it for targeting or optimization in real time, it's very important to connect those use cases with your customer insights people, with your customer segmentation, and be able to roll up those types of behaviors to provide insight for the subsequent campaigns.
Interesting. Tina, what are your thoughts there?
I'm sorry, I think I missed the question on that one.
Sorry. The question was, are there uses for first-party data aside from just targeting? I can move on. Sorry about it.
No problem.
No problem. This is a question I have for Neil and for Tina. Can you talk about the importance of email to publishers? How are you advising publisher partners to think about the relationship of email and identity? Neil, I'd start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I can go first. So I think that for us, it's really about building. I think Michael mentioned this earlier on. Is that it's about really building a relationship with the audience and understanding the audience. I think that the most important work that a publisher can do, that is essential to everything that you'll do as a publisher, is knowing your audience and having real, as intimately as possible communication with your audience. And the email allows you to get really personal and have a specific one-on-one relationship with that reader or that viewer. And so for us, I think that everything gets to really can be built around the email. Tailored content, tailored services, tailored opportunities and experiences that really is not available unless you have some kind of subscription, which again is built around the email. So I think building that email relationship with getting the trust of the audience to give you that information is really an essential part of building not just the business, but the relationship that can drive any other idea that comes forward down the line with growing your business and also pivoting the business model and services that you offer to stay alive and to grow.
Tina, I'd ask you the same question. How are you advising your publishing partners to think about the relationship of email and identity? Actually, one follow-up that we had to that is, how is your team feeling about the longevity of mobile ad ideas as we know them in the mobile app?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit more to the email point that I think Neil did a really good job of bringing home. It's all about understanding for users what the value exchange is, right? So if this publisher has great quality content and I place a value on it, I understand that I'm giving up a little piece of my information in exchange for that because I value what they're providing to me, and I understand that trade-off. I think that, with email addresses and like first-party data more broadly, the important thing is that there's trust. It's trust that advertisers understand that there is value in this data. For publishers, there also needs to be a sense of security of how this data is being used. And then, of course, for users, it's clarity and transparency and ability to opt in and opt out of sharing their first-party data.
Interesting. I guess, I mean, following up from that, Neil, how should publishers, you talk about trust, Neil, how should publishers vet their partners? What are some of the key things to consider when choosing the right partner for your business?
For us, I'm more of a very kind of hands-on person, and so sometimes I tend to draw out that process. I tend to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's and do face-to-face when possible. In fact, I'll tell you a little story about how I came into relationship with CafeMedia. We were at an event in New York, a Google event, and that we were invited to, and we started the conversation there. And that happened, I think, in January, and it took about 4 or 5 months for us to come to terms and work out our relationship with CafeMedia. It's not because they were saying anything that was offensive or out the norm. It's just that we wanted to make sure that we were very thorough and being very clear, because we were handing over a part of our business to them. And so whatever you don't understand, I would say to folks, don't assume that because someone else is using the right vocabulary or jargon of a particular industry that they have all the answers and they know more than you do. Ask the questions and ask them again. Ask them 3 or 4 times and be deliberate until you understand exactly what's involved and what's at stake. That's really the kind of the overall guidance that I would provide. And I would also say make sure that other publishers are using them and have good things to say about them more often than not. That's often goes without saying. If no one in your industry know these guys that you're talking to, then you should probably wait unless you know them personally, is my recommendation in vetting third-party vendors.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Neil. We've got time for one more question, which I'm going to pose to Michael, and then we're going to say goodbye. Michael, what role will PMP and direct buys play once third-party cookies are no longer used? And how do you continue to find success in negotiating higher CPMs?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is one of those clear examples where smaller publishers, it is certainly a struggle for them to establish direct buy terms that are favorable. And I think that this really, so where I can't really speak so much to the marketplace side of the CPM negotiation, I can certainly say that even small publishers will need to up their game on being able to describe and package their audiences and demonstrate what effectively will need to proxy for ROI on the part of the brand. And the real challenge is, for a smaller publisher, that is not an easy case to make, even with the assistance of larger network partnerships. So I would just say that the goal is just to understand the pressure on brands to be data-driven, to demonstrate ROI of their investments, and to understand that your direct buys do play a really valuable purpose in filling a hole for them. So, I would also say they should feel empowered to, talk to those direct buy partners and say, how is it that you're trying to optimize this investment? Which consumers are you trying to reach? And then be able to respond to them with the data that you've got on hand, or be able to collect more first-party data, even, and just kind of ask for that collaboration and that patience and that partnership to build that value case together. Certainly, there's tremendous value in the data and the infrastructure, but there's also just no substitute for collaboration and partnership.
Got it. Thank you, Michael. Very interesting. That'll be it, I guess. We're running out of time, but thank you very much for everyone for attending, and especially Tina, Michael, and Neil. Thank you for your great insights. So just if we didn't get to your questions, CafeMedia will follow up with you by email. I know we got a lot of questions, but we'll be in touch. And I just really want to thank everyone for listening in, submitting those questions, and just for participating. This is a great webinar. Thank you. Have a great day and stay safe, everyone.